holds 10 points which are important for getting into medical school. First, you mentioned about deciding that you have the passion for medicine. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's one thing to say that my father's a doctor, or my mother's a doctor, or that you shadowed a physician. It's another thing to be able to really prove that you care about the practice of medicine. You have the passion for service and helping people and being a physician rather than another health provider. You should both understand why you want to be a physician and be able to demonstrate an enthusiasm that is remarkable and contagious.
Point number two, you mentioned just getting out and just do it, getting experiences.
It's very important. There's no way to be watching a TV show and thinking that that qualifies you for understanding the practices of medicine. What is appropriate? What's an internist do? What does an ophthalmologist do? What does a surgeon do? What does an emergency room physician do? What does a psychiatrist do? The only way that an applicant can understand what those physicians do and what the variety is in a medical school is to be there, to do it. So you should try to help in any way you can, get into as many of these shadowing experiences as possible, meet as many physicians in as many different environments as possible.
Okay, the third point you mentioned is the importance of coursework.
Well, everyone takes the same basic coursework. It's important to demonstrate that you're good in the basic courses: biology, chemistry, physics, organic chemistry, biochemistry, genetics. That's important. However, it's also important for you to develop a relationship within that class. Maybe you're so good that you can help other students. Maybe you're so good that you could be involved in some independent study. Maybe you're so outstanding that in a lecture class of 300, the teacher actually knows you and could write a full page with 3 paragraphs about your many contributions. I remember receiving a letter from an Ivy League school that said that the person who was the applicant in front of me was the single best student in the last 10 years in organic chemistry. That got my attention.
Your fourth point, tell us about the importance of grades.
Well, for the early acceptance or junior honors, virtually all the applicants have all A's. However, we do consider where the grades come from. So if you're in the most competitive colleges, your grades would likely be lower than they would be in colleges that are less competitive. Grades are relative in that sense. Unfortunately, you can't get better than all A's at your college, but all A's at one college is not equal to all A's at MIT. So grades are important, but they're not everything. Grades are often validated by what you say and what you do and your MCATs.
How about your fifth point, the importance of doing research?
If you're an applicant at a research medical university, and you go to the U.S. News listing and you see what the research medical universities are, research is in the medical university's description of themselves. And if you've had no understanding of research, you've had no participation in research, research isn't a spectator sport. You actually have to do it. And if you do it, you'll understand why you want to go to a research medical university. On the other hand, if you have no interest in research and you don't really understand how things go from bench top to the patient's room, how a new procedure, a new pacemaker, a new surgical procedure, a new medicine gets introduced into clinical practice, you miss a lot. That doesn't mean that you can't be a physician. It doesn't mean that you won't be a great doctor, but it means you're going to miss some very important ingredient of what makes the medical school you're looking at special.
Your sixth point is about the importance of community service and altruism.
There's no doubt that physicians are called in the middle of the night, have to have an overriding care and concern about humanity and about their patients. Physicians do many things that go unnoticed. Many things that they do to help other people. So sometimes in the course of an interview, we'll ask about altruism and kindness and things that a person might have done that they didn't include in their application.
Your 7th point is about the MCAT.
The MCAT for some students is make or break, and for other students has less value. It's always a question of the school that you're looking at. Some schools will have a rather fixed MCAT target. For example, Washington University in St. Louis has had the #1 average MCAT score for the last 8 years. So it would be unlikely that they would be interested in an applicant with an MCAT lower than 34, since their average, I believe, is 38. At the University of Florida, here, the average is about 32, which means that there'll be a range of students in the 20s into the 30s. If you can afford a prep course, it's worth taking, because the higher you do, the less likely you are to have to take it again. And the lower your grades, the higher your MCAT has to be, because you could always say, well, you know, I got a B in physics, but look at my physical science. Or I got a B in organic chemistry, and look at this, where you can't say that if they both confirm each other and you're in the low end of grades, you're in the low end of competitiveness in the courses and major, and you're in the low end in MCAT.
So tell us a little bit about how to choose schools to which you're going to apply, your 8th point.
You have to do a personal inventory of the things that you're interested in. If you're interested in primary care, look for schools that have an emphasis on primary care, that have an active emergency room, an active family medicine department, an active community outreach. If you're interested in major research universities and a career in academics, look at those schools. You also then need to understand your finances. If you're a state resident, a state of Florida resident, the state schools are very, very appealing for that reason. And then last, you need to know what your ambition is as far as internship and residency. Not maybe where you want to go, but do you want to stay in-state or out-of-state? Some people just don't like moving all the time. So they'll say, you know, I like to go to the University of Florida, and I'm going to stay there. And that'll be 8 years or 9 years in Gainesville. Those are important decisions. But first and foremost, there'll be the decision about what's the level of loan burden that you're willing to accommodate, whether you want to stay in the state. I know some people have looked in the Mayo Clinic, and for Floridian, the winters are very tough. When you see the thermometer go below 0, it's very tough. And you need to understand what climate you can take, what clinical climate you want, and the general overall atmosphere. We're very proud here that the students have such a collegial relationship with each other, that it's not so intense and cutthroat, and also that the students have so much access to the professors and so much available help.
Your 9th point is about letters of recommendation.
Letters of recommendation, there's some simple guidelines, like have people write letters for you who really know you. Sometimes you'll ask someone to write a letter and they write 3 lines. And we receive it and we say, why did that person ask them to write a letter? They just wrote they got an A in my course. That's not the letter you're looking for. We already know you got an A in the course because it's on your transcript. Get letters from people that know you as a person, and I'd even ask them whether they feel comfortable writing a letter for you and whether they know enough about you to write a letter for you. If you do research, get a letter from your mentor. If you work in the emergency room or have long-term work experience in a medical setting, get a letter from the professor there. If you do regular community service or volunteer work at the hospice or this or that, get a letter from there as well. Show, and if you have a good friend or someone that you've mentored in the community, get a letter from them. So the idea would be have letters that can speak to your qualities as a person, your passion for the profession of medicine, your academic abilities, and most of all, your drive and determination.
And lastly, some summary points on how to prepare for the interview. Handle that.
If you can, it's good to practice, because every interview is going to be different. There'll be cases where you'll go for an interview and they won't know very much about your curriculum. They won't know very much about your major. They might not even know very much about the University of Florida. So you have to be prepared to explain that. You can't assume that the person understands very much about your experiences as an undergraduate, either in community service or in academic or in the rigor of your major or in your shadowing or involvement in the practice of medicine. One thing that they will know is about your research. So if you have research and it's published, you bring it along and show it to them. They can read it. But your interview, you should always be honest. You should assume that the interviewer will look at you very carefully and decide whether they should call or email certain people to confirm certain key facts. It's not unusual to have one professor know another professor and just call them or email them and ask them about your performance or ask them in more detail about what they wrote about you. So that's very important, but most of all, it's important to sit there as calmly as possible and present yourself in a way that you would like to be seen as an honest, ethical, hardworking person who's committed to the practice of medicine and who'll make a fantastic doctor. And you hope at the time that you leave the interview that the person who interviewed said, you know, that's the kind of person I'd like to be my physician.